And there's that big squeal I promised you, Greg. Greg,
That's
welcome.
ZLS
ZLS 055. Dude, I'm so psyched to have you on. This is awesome.
Yeah, should be fun.
Yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit about you? For what I know so far, you're a New Zealander. You did an awesome talk at NGConf, Hardwired, that I just watched. It was really great. And I feel like my daughters would like that too. With the Frozen theme.
Yeah, someone said that's how they were going to teach their kid about programming, and I was like, yeah, that's the win.
I think those pieces might go over my girls' heads right now. They're still a little young, but they'd go for like the Olaf and the Sven pieces. So yeah. Why don't you give us a view into the full Craig Spence?
Yeah, so I'm Craig. I don't know how full I am. I'm from New Zealand. I'm currently living in my mum's spare bedroom because I'm a bit of a COVID refugee. I'm usually based in Stockholm, so I've been working at Spotify for the last 18 months. Moved over there last year, and then COVID happened, and I decided to come back to the island paradise that is New Zealand. So I've been based out of here. Angular GDE, then haven't done much Angular in the last couple of years because Spotify's a React shop, but before that I did kind of 6 or 7 years at New Zealand's biggest website where we rebuilt the whole thing in first AngularJS, then Angular. So I learned some things through that. I've got a background in testing and design systems and a bunch of fun stuff that I think we can talk about today. So yeah, been doing a few talks recently. They've been good fun. Internet talks are weird, but it's still kind of fun.
Yeah. I hear you. I've been trying to do as many talks as I can too. It feels like there's some cool opportunities now. Rob Shen's in the chat. Hey Rob, nice to see you again.
How you doing?
So yeah, before we get into like some of the interesting tech stuff, one thing I like to talk about too is like what got you into programming. Like what was your first job like, and before that maybe even like when did you know this was for you?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Upon reflection, I didn't actually notice the thing that got me into programming. So I, from like high school, whatever, I really went down the music path. So I was playing guitar and bass a lot. I thought I was going to be a musician. Went to uni, started doing music, and got about 6 months into that.
You definitely got a musician vibe to you, I'd say.
Oh, thanks. So. Whatever that was. And got about 6 months into that and kind of realized that probably it wasn't going to be a thing that was going to make life easy for me, basically. And so I moved to engineering and then got into programming and stuff that way. But what I later realized is that as a kid, I'd actually had Lego Mindstorms. So I don't know if you ever saw it, but it was like, there was like a little box about that big and it kind of had some plugs that you could plug motors into and then this visual programming language. And that was my first taste into programming and I didn't even realize it. And then fast forward, 10 years later and I was doing some JavaScript and C# and stuff at uni and I was like, oh, I like this. And then I was really lucky. I got through a pretty sweet internship program here in New Zealand. Ended up working on some Flash games for a little while.
Nice.
Then did a stint at...
What was the Flash games era for you? Like,
so this was very late in Flash times. So I was definitely playing Flash games when they were kind of coming out, but the company that I worked at was called Mini Monos, and they did like this little virtual world for kids. It was kind of you had this little monkey avatar, and you kind of did like environmental stuff. It was pretty sweet.
Nice.
But yeah, they were right at the end of the kind of Flash to Canvas transition, and they'd invested too much in Flash, and so the company didn't make it out of that. Unfortunately, I think that they kind of tried to pivot to iOS, but it didn't really work. Yeah. And then from that, I went into another internship the next year at Weta Digital, who were the company that did like the VFX on Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and name a big movie they've had a part in it. So I got into that world a little bit and started kind of seeing how the code and creative stuff can kind of collide. And that's always been the thing that really sparked it for me. Like, what can I do to to either make pretty things or make interesting things. And that's actually how the front end thing kind of happened, right? Like, to me, it was putting stuff on the internet, on websites is a really visual way to kind of show what you can do. It was a good way to have a portfolio coming out of uni. And so, yeah, I got pretty into JavaScript, and then kind of things spiraled. It's definitely something I've always kind of known I was interested in. Like, I always like maths and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
it's very cool. I've always felt for myself too, like I've had that sort of like a creative streak, or like gravitating towards art and stuff like that, but not having any talent there, but having a lot of talent in math. So it's like front-end development is kind of a nice fit for me. So
totally. Yeah. I remember I had this day, it would have been like my second or third year of uni.
Okay.
And we were in like calculus class. And we were learning about the Fourier transform. And it was this moment where it was like all of my music, all of the physics, all of the maths, all the kind of comp sci stuff just came together, and I was like, oh shit, this is all the same. You know, let's I like this stuff. Let's see where he takes us.
Yeah. It's really cool, man.
Yeah.
So how do you so you were working with like movie stuff, right? Like I'm actually not very much aware of what that code or what that world even looks like very much. Was it similar to like front-end dev stuff, or?
So, kind of, I mean, it's all putting pixels on screens at the end of the day. But so what I was doing, I was an intern on the rendering research team, which sounds way fancier than what it is. I was actually helping work on a tool that did visual regression testing for movies. So the company at the time was moving from a purchased renderer to an in-house built one so that they could customize it more. And they wanted to make sure that they were kind of keeping it up to date and things were looking right. So we were writing a tool in CoffeeScript at the time that was doing visual regression testing of rendered images. The actual rendering is pretty hardcore. Like it's physically based rendering, it's simulation of light.
Is rendering, my understanding of rendering is it's kind of like going from data to actual pixels. Is that okay.
Exactly, yeah. So it's if you take something like so you know, I've got like fancy ray traced graphics cards these days. So that ray tracing process has existed since the 70s, but now we can do it in real time. It's kind of the main shift. So that ray tracing process is that taking a model and shooting a bunch of fake rays of light through it and then getting a picture at the end. And so what the movie studios are doing is that at a crazy high level of accuracy. We're talking some of the biggest supercomputers in the world. Then ending up with a frame of a picture, which you then do, 48 times a second, which you do in 2 frames for 3D, and then you do a 2-hour movie. It's a big computation.
Yeah, that multiplies that quick. I remember my first at university, the first project we had that I was like really excited for was the ray tracer, actually, where we defined like I think it was just like spheres and squares, but we also had like reflective surfaces and like different kinds of light, and that was so much fun when I could finally, like, when I had written the program. And then I was just like making different things. I think I made snowmen because that's like about all you can build with spheres. But still fun.
and the really cool thing about ray tracing is that you very quickly get something quite realistic. Like it's it's
such an easy mental model to hit, right? Because like it's basically like your eye is shooting out and hitting different objects, and the light's coming back to you, and that's exactly what the ray tracer does.
Exactly,
that's the way I remember it.
There's a pretty fancy equation called the rendering equation, and it's got multiple like big integrals and all this kind of crazy shit in it. But it actually is pretty simple when you look at it, but it looks really fancy. So if you ever want to like drop some knowledge, it's just like, here's this like formula function that I understand.
That render function, trivial. Just a few integrals. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, that's kind of how I got into that world of just like creativity but code. And yeah, I just really like seeing something show up on a screen and being like, oh, cool, I know how that works. And yeah, JavaScript's pretty good for that, it turns out.
Cool. Well, another interesting thing you mentioned is going from AngularJS to Angular and then to React. I've been picking up React a little bit where I can. I got Kent C. Dodd's Epic React course, and I'm slowly trying to work my way into it. But before that, I just kind of like pulled it down and was like, let's see what we can build, which is normally how I do stuff. And I don't know. It's not what I imagined it would be. In some ways, that's really cool. Like the hooks, building components that are sexually functions. The idea of that's really cool. But the thing that I find struggling with is I feel like I rely just so heavily on RxJS, and I thought it would work so much better with React. And it feels like they're almost like two competing systems, just like RxJS and the whole React framework.
Yeah, I know people are experimenting with that stuff. We use a lot of Rx because a lot of the Spotify backends are Java, I think. So there's like a bunch of Rx Java stuff in there, and from the Android world. So it's definitely there. We don't use any Rx on our front end. I kind of miss it sometimes. Like you find a problem and it's just like, oh, that would be pretty straightforward in Angular, and then it's just like, I don't even know how to begin with this stuff. It's certainly different.
I feel like the solutions are probably still there. It's just like your brain has to think about it at a different angle, which I don't know if one's better or not. But I feel like I just don't have enough familiarity with React at the moment to make any meaningful judgment.
But, and like my endpoint is still like, I've got to get something to a user to make it work. Who cares? Other than that, I don't think any of us pretend that React or Angular are going to be the hot sauce in 5 years. So it's about that process of picking up a new framework, right? Like how do I get productive in this thing? How do I figure out the mental model so that I can actually ship stuff?
Well, taking that kind of like what you said, there was definitely like this shot of, I don't know what I would call it. Like since picking up Angular, I picked up Angular pretty early in my career. I started just like about 6 years ago now. So, but yeah, picking up Angular, when I remember picking that up, it was like the new hotness, and it was like there's something driving me to keep learning it and to keep understanding it. And picking up React, I definitely felt like shades of that feeling again. Just like learning, having that sense of discovery and learning how to do stuff. So
totally. That's the thing I really like miss from university days, is like unadulterated learning. You just like go and like I did a class that was like we studied like pinball computers and stuff like that, just like weird computation things. And like this, like obviously you learn a lot of stuff in a job in the workplace, but that just like, oh cool, let's go learn about quantum computers or whatever it is. That kind of learning moment is definitely a big driver for me in terms of getting into stuff.
Yeah.
I really want to spend some more time with Svelte.
Yes, me too. Svelte looks so cool. Like the
whole list, you know?
Yeah, it's somewhere on this list that I'll probably never get to. But the whole idea, the ideas they represent seem really cool to me. The idea that the framework shouldn't be there when you ship it. Like that's probably the coolest thing about Svelte to me.
Totally. So. And that to me was the big reason why I believed in Ivy and still believe in Ivy, right? Like I think from an Angular point of view, that heading in that direction, they've had that mindset for it.
Is this an inside joke?
Apparently, I guess Google Hangouts just sucks.
I'm not a big fan of Google Hangouts.
No, I'm using my conference camera, which I don't really pull out for normal work meetings. So.
Oh. Yeah. I get the special treatment.
Yeah, nice. You get I plugged in one extra USB device.
Hey, that could be a big deal if you're using like one of the new MacBook Pros here. Like those USBs are in high demand.
Got my dongles.
Yeah.
It's the old the conference bag that sits in the corner with all my like, okay, sweet, all the backup power adapters, all the backup everything for when everything goes wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, the whole idea of the disappearing framework, it just makes a lot of sense. Like, it's what we've kind of always done anyway. I love the idea of JavaScript as a compile target. I'm not totally sold on the WASM thing for most use cases. I think there's obviously some really good use cases for that stuff, but day to day, I think starting to see some of this like bundlerless stuff happen. Some of the kind of disappearing framework stuff. I think that's definitely where it's going in the next few years.
Yeah. And any eyes on Blazor by any chance?
I haven't touched it myself.
Okay.
I think I don't know. I think anything that helps people ship something to the web, I think is a good thing. I love the web as a compile target. I'm pretty terrified of Flutter, like the idea of just doing
Flutter
everything
seems,
in a canvas.
yeah. Flutter seems super cool in some ways. Like the way I've heard them Flutter discuss it, it's kind of like what you had said earlier, which was like at the end of the day, it's all just pixels, and that's a really interesting way of thinking about things. And I think it's works really well for like native mobile, but crossing that bridge to get into the web, like it's hard. There's just like different design paradigms and different requirements from the two platforms.
Totally. And even just things like, you don't want to reinvent all accessibility. You know, like all the tools that people have and use to actually access the web, and then you just implement your own context menu or something. You know, like something like pretty fundamental that I can just see that breaking stuff in interesting ways. So it scares me a little bit. Maybe it'll get there. But.
Yeah. Option. How long does it take you to compile the code you work on your machine? What do you guys use?
A great question. Yeah, it depends. Like we have. I work on a couple applications. So I work on the classic Spotify desktop app, which is a 12-year-old code base at this point in time.
Wow.
It's one of the original micro front ends. So it's actually a whole bunch of iframe apps. That builds pretty quick because you can build little small parts of that. And then I also work on the Spotify web player, which is a more modern React kind of built app, just Webpack and that kind of stuff.
Okay. It's the Spotify, like the native desktop app, that is Electron. Is that right?
No.
It's not.
It's kind of Electron. So there's a thing that Spotify open sourced back in the day called Chromium Embedded Framework, or Ceph, as we call it. It's a very similar idea to Electron, slightly less general purpose. So it's got quite a much lighter memory footprint, a few things like that. It is essentially Chromium with some extra Spotify niceties plugged in it. I think Steam is actually built using the same tool. So
cool.
Very Electron-like experience, similar experience from kind of dev point of view, just building a website. But we have some extra niceties in there that let us do some, offline playback and those kind of things.
Yeah, very cool. Josh says hi. Hey, Josh, another dev streamer. So cool. Any chance you're using NX?
We're not. So the conversation has come up a few times.
Cool.
So we are technically a monorepo. We've got about 3-ish applications, quite big applications that live in our code base. One of my big challenges at the moment is application organization, and we haven't quite got it right. So we started looking at kind of some more serious kind of monorepo looking tools. We're using workspaces at the moment. We're not super committed to them yet. Like, we're not making a bunch of local packages. It's not quite the thing that we're prioritizing right now, but I think it'll continue to go that way.
Makes sense. So Ceph. Oh, so this is what you were talking about, Ceph.
Yeah, exactly.
In C++. Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So that gives us the whole native kind of wrapper, and then we just dump a bunch of iframes inside of it.
There you go. App done.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Oh, and I want to get to this other question that was asked earlier, but yeah, interesting. So, have you ever messed with OBS before?
No. So that's the like the streaming software, right? Basically.
Yeah. That's pretty much what most people are using. We're not right now. We're using StreamYard, but I've been wanting to like do some more. StreamYard is just so nice for being able to send a guest a link. Like this was
is so easy. Yeah, I actually clicked the button. Like some of the conference setups I've had this year, it has been quite involved, and this was just like click a button that seems to work.
Yeah, so like I was looking around it, like I should be able to figure this out. I'm an engineer. Just give me like a whatever that is, the RPTM feed or whatever that is. I'll figure something out. And so I'm looking around for like, how are people doing this? What most people do is they just, there you go, RTMP. That's the right acronym. Who knows what that stands for? But like what they're doing is they're like doing a Zoom meeting or a Slack or like some sort of video conferencing, and then just like capturing that piece of their monitor and sending it to OBS, which seems like kind of sus to me. I don't know if I'm using that right. But
yeah, I definitely sus. Yeah. I'm definitely thinking about streaming a bit. Like, I spend so much time just like sitting around playing guitar and writing code that like maybe that would be fun to do online. I don't know. I'm already so online, but what can it hurt?
Yeah. Well, with the world we're living in now, I feel like. Well, I started my live stream mainly because I wanted to get better at presenting and talking and stuff like that. And I was having a hard time sometimes finding opportunities to do that. So I was like, screw it, I'll make my own. And this has been fun. But it also happened to happen right around the time COVID was going. And it's been a cool way to like meet people still. Like conferences. So Roshan talking about the React Conf this year. They used Zoom for presentation meetings. There's something about like, I don't know, dumping a bunch of strangers into a Zoom is like
doesn't quite work the same.
Yeah, like sometimes I feel like sometimes when I've had that situation, because I've gone to a couple of conferences now during COVID. Sometimes you can kind of make a connection. Like maybe you'll recognize someone, or you and someone will just randomly have some connection because of some tool you used in the past. But I don't know. And even now, like I feel like if you were sitting in the same room as me, like not in New Zealand, like actually here, the conversation would flow a little bit better. We'd be able to, like, without even thinking about it, both of us would be able to read the other a little bit better and like have better conversation that way. But it's better than nothing, I guess. It's still better than like dropping us and a bunch of people in a Zoom. So
totally. And I actually definitely prefer this over like giving talks this year has been super weird, just because like there's no feedback. There's no you don't know if your jokes have landed or if people are actually enjoying it. It's just you talking at a screen. Which is just cognitively not quite as fun. It's not like, I like talking in front of a crowd. I'm got a huge mouth and just like saying dumb shit. So not being able to do that this year has definitely been a bit weird.
Well, so your talk for NGConf Hardwire, and let me see. I think I got the link in here. I'll put it in chat so people can check it out too. It's like a really funny talk. And one where you'd expect, like normally, I imagine it would be like, you'd be waiting for like the crowd to start laughing at different points and like making sure the jokes are all landing. And when it's just you, and especially if it's just a recording, like here at least we got people in chat and kind of interacting with us. But like, it's just a recording. It's like I have no idea how this is going to land, but hopefully it goes well.
And that talk was like, it was a huge risk. Like I had no idea if it was going to work. Like I'd done a Frozen talk before.
I'm slightly interested.
I think that was in GDE. It was a build tools one, so it was more of the same stuff. But like, having a song in a talk, like obviously that conference was going to be musical based, so I thought, why not go big? It's NGConf. Yes, Frozen is in the movie. But I didn't get any reaction to it. So luckily, because I was doing that one live, and so it was straight like just go do it, and then I actually got to read the chat log after, and that was delightful. Like that was a really nice time to kind of see the feedback afterwards in that way. But at the time, I had no clue. I had no idea if people were enjoying it. I was like, people could have just been like, what is this thing? And it turned out pretty good. I was pretty happy with it. But yeah, weird year for conferences.
Well, so normally I'm a big basketball fan, like NBA, and they've been doing like the thing where like all the players are there in the stadium and they're like surrounded by television screens with people on them. But it's I don't know, it's just so awkward. Like remembering like the year before, I have a bunch of friends in Toronto with Narwhal, and seeing there's like a buzzer beating shot that someone made, and like the whole crowd just goes crazy, and they show out to like the whole city's going crazy out in the streets, and like this similar like buzzer beater moment on in like this year, it was like everyone's just kind of like still watching there, like eating their popcorn on the screens, and then like 10 seconds later it's like it's so like deflating. But at least you had your chat logs to see people did enjoy it. So.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing about this year is like I just feel like I haven't laughed as much. You know what I mean? Like Slack banter is fine, but it's not quite the same as like actually being around a team. Like my team's pretty funny. Like we have a pretty good time. And so just like you have some little Slack jokes, funny emoji or whatever, but it's definitely not quite the same. So yeah, I'm heading back to Sweden in about 4 or 5 weeks now. So looking forward to being in the same time zone. Looking forward to maybe being able to see some of my team somehow. So that'll be good.
Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah, I'm on the West Coast in the U.S. and the rest of my team's on the East Coast that I'm working with right now. It's just a weird feeling to like wake up at 7 a.m. but no, it's 10 a.m. for them, and like I don't know. Like I feel like I'm already starting out behind every day. It's a weird feeling to have. Yeah.
So for context, my team is 11 hours behind me. So we have a daily meeting at 10 a.m. For me, that's 9 p.m. at the moment. So
are you working through the night then with them, or do you just end with them at the same time?
I kind of trying to balance it a bit. I'm doing a few hours during the day, so it's lunchtime here now. I'll do a few hours after this, and then I kind of do a couple hours before a meeting, and then we'll kind of sync and then do a couple more hours after. So it's been okay. I think they're reasonably happy with how that's gone, but definitely going to be easier to be on the same time zone for sure.
Yeah, makes sense. So I wanted to come back to this question because it seemed like a really good segue, especially given the talk that you gave. So your talk was called Into the Unknown, talking somewhat about the unknown type, but also just showing how you can use TypeScript to really make your libraries and your APIs a lot better. One way I like to introduce like TypeScript is, especially with people that have been around more, like I feel like you've had some more experience with this. I came in and TypeScript was the thing already. So I don't know, I didn't know starting out that there was what JS was like. Like I've kind of gone back and seen it a little bit. But for the most part, it's been like, okay, like in college, we always did just Java, and like TypeScript seemed a lot like Java syntactically and like C#. So it was just like, okay, like this seems straightforward. But seeing at the time, like a lot of people are just losing their minds online, like TypeScript is terrible. Like, why did we do this? I don't want to go to Angular anymore because I don't like TypeScript. So
yeah.
Did you how did that work out for you? Like when Angular came out, did you jump on board or
So Angular is actually an interesting one for us because we were doing TypeScript with AngularJS.
Oh, okay.
So we the project I was on, I was working at a company with a .NET backend and not that much front end experience.
Okay.
And we were talking about replacing basically old .NET UI code with nice shiny new, at the time, AngularJS code. And so we did how can we make this transition a bit easier for our bunch of C# devs? Let's go with TypeScript. And so we were on TypeScript from kind of the 0.8 or something like that, so pre V1. And so I've seen the kind of whole transition of that world.
So you were using TypeScript and AngularJS before it was like natively supported, because like
absolutely,
later on it does get natively supported in AngularJS, right? With like the whole component syntax, where you can actually make components with classes in AngularJS.
Yes, so that was still very much you had to compile it. Like there was never a Angular CLI wasn't a thing. None of the
Yeah,
build stuff was a thing. So it was very much we were wiring up our own kind of Webpack builds to make that stuff work.
nice.
Yeah, I don't think it was ever official. Because I don't know if any of you remember, but at one point, pre Angular 2, we were talking about AtScript,
Yeah,
which was going to be Google's dual typed JavaScript language. And then everyone kind of said, this is dumb, just use TypeScript.
yeah,
That wasn't the exact conversation, but that's basically how I
yeah,
remember it. And then I
yeah,
remember the announcement that AtScript wasn't going to be a thing was great. But if we go back even further, I definitely had to be sold on TypeScript myself originally because I'd spent a few years at that point really learning the ins and outs of JavaScript. Like I knew the sinkholes, I knew the places where you can destroy everything, but I also knew the flexibility, right? Like I knew
yeah,
how easy it is to get inside and do kind of metaprogramming stuff, which I think it's personally kind of taken till now to really be able to pull that stuff off with TypeScript, right? Like the
hmm
type system has to have evolved to kind of support those cases.
yeah.
Um,
I'm curious too. Whether you think it is sufficient now. I still feel like if you're messing around with stuff with like prototypes in objects, it doesn't feel like the TypeScript stuff is sufficient to really describe all that just right yet. So
no, not quite. You can make it work. I'm actually writing up some stuff now that I've been playing with the last few days, which
mm,
does some pretty weird stuff. And you can make it work. But again, there's a lot of unknown types. You kind of you're not actually type safe. So I certainly find that you have to fight a little bit less to make it work. You're not just throwing any's all over the place. That kind of stuff. So yeah, and I mean some of the new stuff that's coming out, like this template type stuff. It's cool. It's pretty exciting. So, but yeah, it took me a while to be sold on the types thing. I was like, no, I want all the flexibility that I have in this language. But then the key for me was like, people shouldn't have to learn JavaScript to the level that I learned it to be able to ship a product to some users.
mm,
And that's what TypeScript does, right? There's just that level of safety that you can just ship a few less bugs, which means you've got a few less bug domains to worry about.
yeah.
And yeah, that's a big sell for me.
That's interesting. So when I think TypeScript, I very rarely think of, oh, well, this will help me ship less bugs. Like I feel like those would kind of, well, maybe there's some truth to that. I feel like there are some class of bugs that TypeScript would really help with. But the big thing that I have like a hard time understanding, like the world before I came to it, like how did you just like keep all that cognitive load in your head? Like when you're working with an API, I feel like either there must have been something where you're relying heavily on JS docs in a way that I don't understand, or like you just always had the documentation open or something like that.
Yeah. So there's three parts to it. One is
Okay.
that JS docs didn't exist.
Okay. Good.
APIs are smaller. There was definitely less going on. We weren't building as complex applications. And in general, you could like just have the jQuery API in your head, and you were probably pretty good.
Okay.
Two, spelling errors happened all the time. So, but also the refresh cycle was faster, right? We didn't have Webpack and stuff sitting there, so you'd refresh and you'd get an error in the console, and you fix your typo and move on. And then the third part, I guess, is you just had null errors at runtime all the fucking time. And we often didn't know about them, right? Because we didn't have as good error reporting. It was just Wild West. It was just not. We weren't building as good software.
Yeah. So you're closing the feedback time because we're able to do it at development time. Hey, here's some problems there. To me though, it's just like, I don't know, maybe I've just been too spoiled, but like the intelligence that comes with it, like I feel like if I want to understand an API, I never look at the docs. If it's a good TypeScript API, I just like hit dot like on some object and like, well, let's see what this does.
And honestly, to me, is how I sell people. Like, still the JavaScript purists. That's how I sell them on TypeScript now, because I'm like, do you use VS Code? And sure, 95% of them say yes. And then you say, you're already using TypeScript.
Mm.
You know, it's so baked in that world. There's so much niceness coming from that. That the things that they think are JavaScript are actually just those niceties of having a typed language underneath it. Of course, you still get the people who are still using them and still want to use like raw JavaScript, and I respect that. You know, there's a world for that, but it comes down to what are we doing as engineers? We're building software for users. What can I do to make that easier? To reduce that cognitive load we're talking about. Like, I've forgotten the jQuery API. Like, I used it every day for years of my life, and I can't remember how to do stuff with it now because I don't have to. And that frees up my brain to solve other sets of problems, which is a win, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Being able to increase your tool set so that you can focus on the tool or focus on the problem you actually need to focus on. I think that's like, that's what Narwhal tries to do, like with NX. It's sort of like a different set of problems, like the configuration and setting up your workspace and all that stuff. But yeah, I think it's a very similar mindset. I was actually having a discussion with some people at a meetup in Germany, of all things, but we were talking about there's this tendency, I think, in front end development. I'm starting to see like my first round where it seems like everyone's chasing their tail a little bit, and then we get to a point where it's like, here's a new framework, and kind of now you can do like statically loaded pages, but still in an SPA. It's like, well, we have that before we had SPAs? Yep. Yeah, I don't know, chasing that tail, but each iteration, I feel like the tool set at least is getting much, much better, and that seems to be like the biggest advancement going forward.
Totally. So. And I've seen this a couple times now, and what I really think it is it's an acknowledgement that building UI is hard. You know, if you look at some of the traditional mindsets of what we were building, with say I don't know, PHP rendered site or a classic Java or .NET or whatever it was, they were less complex UIs, and so we represent all this new stuff to the same developers, and they say, that's fine, I could do that 5-10 years ago. But the thing is, you couldn't, right? Like there are micro interactions, there are niceties that we have with building a UI now that are actually better for our users. They can be more easily internationalized. They can be more easily made accessible. And that complexity has to go somewhere. And so that's what we see happen. We see this big round of, let's try all this fun new stuff, and then, cool, let's collapse a bunch of that complexity into a framework of something. And you see that cycle happening a few times. And so I think it's overall just acknowledging, building UIs is really hard. Building clear UIs is really hard. And the tools have to keep up with that.
Do you feel like from a user's perspective, the standard for your UIs is going up as time's going along too? Like, so we've talked a bit about like how the environment allows for more complex UIs. But do we think does more complex UIs, is there value in that, do you think? Or do you think we're just kind of chasing our tail on that a little bit too?
It's the right question to ask. I think yes. Because it's a balance, right? It's a complex UI, which we've been able to make for a long time. But it's with an authoring experience that is easier too, right? Because you've got to be able to ship new things fast, right? To stay it's down. I think, like, we talk about Spotify is competing with Apple and Google and Amazon, who are engineering powerhouses, right? They can throw a bunch of people at something and beat us. So we have to stay really nimble. We have to be really, really able to iterate as fast as we can. And I think it's that combination of complex UIs plus faster iteration that is where that sweet spot is. Like, I don't know, do you remember when the original Gmail came out?
Yes, yeah, I do.
So that was insane for the web. You know, like that was a website and it did all this stuff. And everyone was just blown away by that. And now if you looked at the original Gmail site, you'd be like, oh, that's dull. You know, it's like, compare it to something, a modern, UI. So
I don't know. Like, Yes, yes, I see some of that point, but I feel like if you look at like the original release of Gmail versus like the state Gmail's in now, it feels like for the most part they're functionally the same, just with a different coat of paint on top.
I
So I
think,
don't know.
like, yes, I definitely agree with that. But if you look at what that coat of paint gives, you know, whether it's better accessibility or
Hey Lars, by the
it's
way.
lunchtime, it's not too early. Yeah, whether it's better accessibility or it's you know, clearer affordances for different types of people. Just there are certain things that we can do more easily now that we couldn't, or for instance, like how Google is able to experiment with that UI, right?
Yeah.
And get to a better place with it. I think there's kind of meta problems that we're solving there, and that complexity again has to go somewhere. So it's going
Yeah.
into the tooling, I think.
Since you opened that door, one thing I've been like super, I've yet to see a really good solution on is like a really good system for A/B tests or like a feature toggle kind of idea, like some very similar ideas.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't know. It feels like a problem that could have a good solution, but it's just I've never seen it done well. It's always comes out complex and seems like needlessly so. So. Do y'all do that in Spotify at all? Okay.
Yeah, we have. I think this is one of the things where like that's some secret sauce there, right? Like,
oh, okay. Sorry.
no, like, not even just the Spotify, but like at the big codes, you know, it's that's the thing that they're really locking down.
Yeah.
I've heard really good things about Launch Darkly. That's a tool that I think does it pretty well. But yeah, to really lock in the kind of experimental part of it, that's where a lot of the big company magic is. And so it doesn't really surprise me that no one's like open sourced any of that stuff yet. I think it'll happen. But yeah, getting that stuff right is huge. Like if I'm thinking from an Angular point of view, like you want to be able to like A/B test whole applications or whole routes or whole components at different parts of the route tree. To me, it almost smells like something they should put in the framework.
Well, specifically in the router, it seems like to me, like just having different, like in the code base, the different components.
Because that was a problem that my previous company we had. Is like you want to be able to ship two versions of a component, but at the time, you know, you can now. But lazy loading a component was, you know, possible but awful, and that just breaks a whole bunch of use cases. Like, what do you ship both versions and then let people just turn them on and off in the UI? Maybe, you know, it's yeah. That experimental side of stuff is there's still a lot of scope. I think those are the problems that I'm particularly interested in. Like, there's some kind of meta problems with UI, like and code bases in general. Like, I'm super interested in experimentation and incremental improvement and refactoring and some of these things that every code base has as problems that we don't necessarily have solutions for yet.
Nice. Oh, Brandon's dropping it with the Angular there.
And this is the thing, right? Like, should it live in the framework or should it live in the community? I sit on the fence with so many of those things.
Yeah. Well, could I ask, like, what are other similar problems that you're trying to tackle? Are there any specific ones you can think of?
Yeah, so the big one I'm working on at the moment, and I'm feeling pretty good about my solution to, is a problem that I've seen at a number of the companies that I work at, which is how do you incrementally make something better in your code base, right? Like the classic example is so TypeScript strict mode. If anyone has ever tried to enable TypeScript strict mode in their application, it's pretty much impossible unless you had it on from the start. And from that point, it's pretty much impossible to get like buy-in from a team or buy-in from a product manager or whatever it is to actually do that, because it's a big piece of work.
Yeah.
And so to me, I'm like, how do you do that thing incrementally? Another good one is like a new lint rule, right? Someone finds this new lint rule that they want to do. They want to just gradually improve this, or a migration from JavaScript to TypeScript. All these kind of problems that are too big to do in one go.
Yeah.
And so I'm working on some tooling. Exactly. working on some tooling that we're starting to use internally at Spotify for doing this, and I'm not super sold that it's the right solution, but I think it's a good idea. Yeah, so it's the thing that I'm calling
better. Nice.
We can drop a link later, but the gist is basically run a test, take a snapshot of that test, store the snapshot in your app like you would any other Jest snapshot or a log file or anything like that, and then just make sure it doesn't get worse.
Okay.
And so from that, I think you can at least encourage people to move in the right direction, without having to take a month to put a big PR that then rots. So that's the stuff that I'm kind of thinking about at the moment. Because again, I've seen it in a bunch of code bases. People keep saying to me, "Hey, cool, this would be useful for us."
Yeah,
so that's a fun way to do some open source.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because like the situations you described, I've always thought of those as like the opportunities for heroism to emerge in like a organization. Like, who's going to take on this massive task and try to get it all in one PR and do all the merge conflicts and all that stuff?
Yeah.
So,
and to me, like I'm so anti-hero that I think one of my big learnings in my career has been I'm really awful at taking on those big things because I'll do it. I'll just gut myself and do the big task. But that does two things. One, it puts a bunch of extra work on me, and then I burn out. And two, it takes away learning opportunities from other people. So one of my big learnings as I've kind of gone as a developer and worked my way up is that part of my responsibility is not taking all the hero tasks so that other people have those opportunities to do the learning that I've done. Like, cool, maybe I could solve that thing in an hour, but if someone else can solve it in 3 hours and learn a bunch of stuff, that's valuable too. And there's a balance there, right? Sometimes things are important to just get done quickly, but being good at assessing when someone else should get that chance to collectively be one of the heroes.
Well, to be a steward of like the team's advancement as a team, but also as a collection of individuals. That's a really interesting way to think about it. I don't know if I've ever thought about it that way, but
this is another one. I've actually got there's a comment in a random issue on my GitHub repo that has actually turned that on, and it's really cool. You suddenly can just introduce type-safe templates. It's probably a blog post in there somewhere, but we'll see.
Very nice. I'll be looking forward to it. Curious, like maybe get into some more meta topics here, but topics I find interesting. What do you think like the role of leadership is in sort of our world and like our teams and our like development circles? Like, so I've always thought of like leadership as being like that heroism, like who's going to jump on the bomb so that the rest of the team can still be productive. So yeah, I mean I thought of things that way. I also just try to make sure, I'm big on like relationships between humans. I think like the way we work is like understanding that psychology and that part of us can really enable people on a team to like work better and feel more like when they feel like they belong. I feel like you can enable like a better team. That the more your team can accomplish, the more an individual can accomplish too. So those are like where I've gone with leadership. And
I think that's all totally right. And I think the big part of leadership to me is kind of that, definitely the jumping on the bomb stuff. Like there are times where it is like I'm a big fan of the idea of like servant leadership. I've never been one. I don't want a bunch of reports. Like I'm not that kind of. I'm not a manager. I can't manage myself, let alone other people. But I think I can give myself to a group of people. Like I don't mind if it's me doing some dumb work that no one else wants to do, so they can be more productive at stuff. Great. If it's me taking on some work so they have space to do something more interesting, that's cool. But also I think a big part of leadership is finding that time to look at the slightly bigger problems that either it's not the remit of, or there's not the time for, to solve them, and then being brave enough to put your hand up in the situations where you've got either a say or the kind of buy-in to say the dumb thing. You know, whether it's the dumb question that everyone's wondering but no one wants to ask, or the this is stupid, we shouldn't do this question. You know, it's having
the elephant in the room. Yeah,
exactly, and using that. Like, I mean, I'm a straight white young dude. You know, I can go into a lot of situations and put a lot of myself on the line that other people can't necessarily. And so it's using that position to and that privilege to jump on those bombs. So not just the technical bombs, because obviously there are technical bombs, but the cultural bombs, the
political bombs, kind of.
Exactly. And that's about influence, and it's about kind of building a reputation where you've got some reputation to spare, so you can jump on those things.
Yeah. I talk a lot about, not just reputation, but just like relationships between individuals. I always think of them as like economies. Like it's like an economy of trust that you're building between different people, and at different levels, you know, that enables different things to kind of come out. And it's interesting too, because like as you build trust, you don't really spend trust. Like sometimes you do. Sometimes you lose trust if you mess up in some way. But that when you have some level of trust between two people, I feel like I don't know. It enables, it lets people be themselves around each other, and I feel like it lets people do their best work. And be honest. Yeah. Like
it can be such a binary thing, right?
Yeah.
You can do something and then it just goes. But then you have to build it back up again. You know what I mean? It's like this. It's like a sawtooth wave almost. You build and build and build and build and build, and then it drops away.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of constant rebuilding of trust that you have to get good at. And a lot of that comes down to owning your mistakes, not being afraid of talking about failure, and all those kind of things. It's that, isn't it?
Well, it's too, just like pointing out the bad idea in the room. I absolutely agree with what you had mentioned about like being able to wield your privilege in some ways, in some of those like political situations. I think.
Totally.
I think there's also like some level of like two different people could make that observation, and if one of them has like trust, kind of regardless of how they get to it, like that putting that problem out is like appreciated. Whereas if there's like someone new on the team that's like that doesn't have that trust, it almost feels like them pointing out that problem is like them kind of, I don't know, like poo-pooing on the problem. And like so in the first situation, their economy of trust actually went up from from doing the same thing. To the person who didn't have it yet, it actually goes down quite a bit, because now everyone's kind of on guard from this person who pointed out this problem. So
totally, and that's where you get into conversations around like influence and just actual communication styles, which has been a really interesting one for me, coming from New Zealand to Sweden. Like, as countries, they're economically quite similar, socially similar in lots of ways, but communication styles probably couldn't be more different.
Really, that's interesting.
And so learning more. I'm still not perfect. I've been here for the last few months, so I'm gonna have to get back used to it again. But seeing how different teams of people, especially in such an international company, how different humans interact with each other, what people's expectations are around how you communicate with them, and how to manage those expectations, and also how to be clear about your own expectations, right? Like, I like quite direct feedback, but I also like hearing that I'm awesome all the time.
Yeah.
So I need that kind of the positive reinforcement, as well as the you fucked up. So Sweden versus New Zealand, how do they differ?
I'm curious about that part.
I would say the big one is Sweden is very consensus driven.
Okay.
So the kind of idea, and like if you look at some of this COVID response stuff, it might kind of be the way. If they seem to think that if you get everyone pointed in the same direction and take more time to get everyone in that consensus, then you move very quickly, right? There's no one arguing, but that consensus building time can take quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
In New Zealand, it's more like that kind of disagree and commit style, right? Where you're like, I think that's stupid, but whatever, we'll go with it for a little bit and see what happens.
Okay.
And they're similar in lots of ways, but they're also different enough that you've kind of got to adjust a bit. Definitely, I think in New Zealand, I see the hero thing that we talked about a bit more often. Like, and maybe that's more part of my growth as an engineer. But definitely the idea of just jumping onto a thing and then seeing how it works out. New Zealand, this is kind of she'll be right attitude, which is just like things will work out. We'll do something and we'll see what happens. And I don't know if it's just the draw or whatever it is, but it tends to figure itself out here. So it's definitely different. I mean, there's some kind of bigger differences. Like, I don't want to poo-hoo Sweden very much, but one of the biggest differences for me was like if I'm walking around in New Zealand, you kind of just say hi to people on the street. If I did that in Sweden, people would think I was a sociopath.
I would not do well in Sweden then.
Yeah. And it's fine, it's just an adjustment. But yeah, turns out different countries are different.
That's interesting. So like, if I understand, like, in New Zealand, it would be like, okay, we have a disagreement, but we're going to do it your way, and like I'm okay with that. Whereas in Sweden, they kind of want to like, it's not enough for you to like just be like, okay, I guess we'll do it that way. You have to like get on board with it. Is that the idea? Okay.
Yeah. So I think like if we literally look at the COVID responses, it's a pretty clear example of it, right? So in New Zealand, there's been very strong trust in the government, right? Like the government has done a really good thing here. It's worked out pretty well, but there has always been this phase of questioning, right? Like it's been cool. What is this the right thing to do? Let's ask the right questions, and then we'll see what happens, right? And then you criticize later, which is good. If you look at Sweden, obviously I haven't been there for all of it, but my perspective of it has been very high government trust, but without that degree of questioning, right? It's been okay, cool. We trust the government. They know what we're doing. We're all in on this. We all agree with it.
But if someone were to question the government, it's almost like sacrilege at that point.
Yes, exactly. And so that's going to be interesting to go back to. I think, I mean, we're not going to know what the outcomes of any of this stuff is for a lot of years to come. I'm in quite an interesting perspective, which is that I get to be in New Zealand and Sweden, which are kind of the two dichotomy points of the response. So that's
super interesting. It feels like America's like stuck between the two right now. Is kind of like where at least from my perspective where it's at. Because like we're founded on sort of this like nothing's reference. Like that was kind of our whole thing. Like, who needs the king? We got this. But now it feels like with our two-party system and being like, I don't know, we consider ourselves the superpower. It's like, who are we? Who are we to question, the direction of our parties? Or I don't know.
It's an interesting time to be alive for sure. Yeah, I think the whole I don't remember who said it, but America sneezes and the whole world gets a cold.
I have not heard that. That's interesting.
Definitely interesting to see that world, and have very very little hands-on experience with American government, but you kind of see the repercussions of it. So it's been interesting.
For sure. Well, I've got here, Lars posted the ultimate guide to implementing feature flags in Angular application. I'll have to check this out. Thanks for sharing this, Lars. Did you want to share a link to your Betterer stuff before we sign off?
Yeah. Where's the best? Where do I post the link? Is my question.
I don't know. Send it to me. Do you see the private chat? And I'll relay it.
So,
The one downside of StreamYard is it's hard for like a guest to make a comment, unfortunately. But there we go. That didn't take too long. So there it is. Phenomenal. I said that wrong the first time I read it.
yeah,
It's a lot better when you actually take the time to read it.
honestly, it's my biggest regret on the internet. I could have picked anything else.
That's really funny. Okay, one last question before I let you go, and this is just like latching on to this weird thing from your talk from NGConf, and I don't know. Yeah, hopefully this will be a quick thing so I can let you go. But I noticed, so you in one of your functions, I think it was freeze, you had a type check on the parameters coming in saying, I think it was like freezable of a generic. This is a freezable version of this generic type T. But after that type assertion of the parameter, the first line, or I think the first thing you did was actually assert that it was freezable after that. I never do that in my code. I never actually do the assert and throw. And like where you had the assertion functions, I would just do like a type checker. I think you covered that in your talk too. I'm curious, is that just, in your opinion, is that just like a style difference, or is there a meaningful? So the assert at that point, that's like a runtime check versus your development time check. Have you found that that's helpful in some situations, or?
Yeah. So this is a really.
I wanted, before I lost you, Craig, I want to make sure I asked this.
So again, this is the thing that I think about as a library author, right? Like, I can't guarantee that the person using this code is using TypeScript.
Okay.
Where should the point of failure be? And the point of failure, if you're using JavaScript, should be a throw with a meaningful error message at runtime. And that's what that assertion gives you, right? It's definitely stylistic. You definitely don't need to add it. The difference is that if you don't have that, you'll get another error somewhere else, which is a property being undefined or something. So yeah, it's just a nice little runtime check as well. And actually, since I've given that talk again, I've been pretty explicit about that and just been like, cool, this means that we're safe, even if TypeScript isn't keeping us in check.
Very cool. Okay, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. The reason I put my finger up like this is because we're living in a potentially new world. Now we've got Dino. We could be sure we're using TypeScript. Although
exactly.
We could always be sending in as any into that parameter too. So
exactly.
You never know. But cool. Craig, thank you so much for coming on. It's so cool to be able to make a connection between Phoenix and New Zealand or soon to be Sweden. So it's super cool. Thanks for coming by.
No, thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, y'all, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye now.
See you later. Bye.